Welcome to Storytellers with Christy Lou. I'm really excited to have you here tonight. I'm going to be introducing Susan Grant to you tonight. She'll be my author tonight, and we're going to be talking about her novel, The Bottle House. All right, so I'm going to get started here again. As I said, not guilty. The crack of the gavel punctuated the words he'd feared most. Stefan's stomach dropped, and he quickly sat down, afraid his legs would buckle. He chanced to look at his client, Allie Barker, who sat with her hands over her face, her shoulders heaving as the waves of the verdict washed over her. 3-year-old Lauren sat in her mini wheelchair and stared at her mother, not understanding what had just happened. Stefan looked around the courtroom, and his gaze stopped at the jury box. 2 of the very people who had just decided Allie's fate were now dabbing at their eyes with tissues. Oh, Lord. How could this have happened? You know how much Allie needed a win in her personal injury case, but no. You refused to help. And now she and little Lauren will not have the funds to aid in Lauren's ongoing medical bills. I hope you're happy as you notice the suffering you could have prevented. As the courtroom cleared, one of the jurors who had been crying walked slowly to their table, seemingly unsure she would be welcomed. Nervousness joined anger and regret in Stefan's gut. He quickly reached for his notes and folders, sure this woman would blame him for his inadequacies that ultimately lost the case for Allie. Stefan rose as she came near. I'm so sorry this case turned out the way it did. The juror pulled at the crumpled tissue in her hand. Watching little Lauren, realizing she will never walk again, broke my heart. The woman's voice wavered. I know I voted not guilty, but I want you to know that I noticed the hurt, grief, and devastation Miss Barker and Lauren have now and will continue to have to live with. In spite of how it looks, I do care. Stefan nodded. It was obvious to me the recall on her car was not fixed, and there was a strong possibility the mechanic Miss Barker spoke with acted out of spite, causing the horrible accident. I just couldn't vote guilty because the man did not testify in court. I needed to hear from him, but I didn't. She looked down and stiffened her shoulders before turning and walking away. Her words only added to the large helping of guilt Stefan already had. He could feel heat fill his cheeks as he sat back down and looked at his client. Allie turned and their eyes met. Stefan's body drew back involuntarily as he saw the look of anguish on this young mother's face. Her hands, wet from tears, shook as she pulled a lock of hair out of her eyes and tucked it behind one ear. It's okay, Mr. Krause. You did everything you could to help me and Lauren. We'll get by. You'll see. Allie wiped her eyes once more. Gathering her things, she rose, unlocked the brakes on Lauren's wheelchair, and slowly pushed her disabled daughter from the room. Stefan rubbed at the stiffness in his neck. He knew he should have said something in reply, or at the very least apologized for his failure. Instead, he began shoving papers into his briefcase, disgusted with himself. He left the courtroom and marched to his car, pulling the knot of his tie loose as he walked. After tossing his briefcase into the passenger seat, Stefan got in and drove down a road he traveled daily, passing the church he had attended with his late wife, Sophie. In that moment, Stefan's anger focused on God once again. He had refused to return for Sunday services since Sophie had died of colon cancer a 1.5 years ago. Any God who failed to extend his mercy to his beautiful wife was not a God he wanted to worship. As his feelings of despair mounted, he stepped on the accelerator more than usual, sending his car ahead at a dangerous speed. He no longer cared. So what if he crashed the car? He'd be better off dead anyway. He no longer had his wife to live for, and had heaped additional anguish on his young client. The weight of self-loathing was getting too much to carry. Arriving at his law firm, Stefan grabbed his briefcase and walked into the building. Mrs. Warren, his secretary and paralegal, had gone home for the day, and he breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't feel like talking about the lost court case. He had other accusations to tend to. Stefan swung his briefcase onto his desk with a bang. As he began to open the clasps, his eyes were drawn unswervingly to Sophie's picture sitting on the right corner of his desk. Stefan sat down heavily in his chair. "What must you think of your husband today?" Stefan said, speaking to the picture. "I lost the court case. There's a part of me that's glad you aren't here to see my failure." After a moment, his anger stirred again, and his hands curled into fists. "How could you have continued to put your faith in a God who doesn't care about the agony of a young, single mother and her crippled daughter, one who desperately needed the financial help that a favorable ruling in her case would have provided?" Stefan sucked in a deep breath as he realized he also felt anger for his dead wife. Repulsed at this thought, Stefan jumped up and moved away from the desk, preventing Sophie's picture from throwing accusations at him. The window in the office drew him, and Stefan took a long look at the shade of a maple tree, gnarled with age. As his spirit relaxed a bit, he continued his conversation with his late wife in a softer tone. "Sophie, please tell me how you could love a God who allowed such pain to throb through your body, ultimately taking your breath permanently away." He waited for an answer, but knew none would come. After a moment, Stefan turned and walked out of the building, determined to never enter it again. "I hope the dead cannot see all of the despair that saturate this life." Stefan stood near his wife's headstone, his shoulders hunched. "Oh, Sophie, I'm so ashamed. I failed you, and now I've failed Allie. When you needed encouragement and support so badly, I crumbled under my own pain. You were the one with colon cancer. You were the one who had to endure unthinkable pain, and yet I focused on mine." Stefan's lips trembled as a tear traced the curve of his cheek. "And now I've failed Allie and Lauren, too." Stefan sat down hard under a tree and gazed at Sophie's grave. The image of little Lauren with her blonde pigtails, confined to a miniature wheelchair when she should be running and playing, filled his mind. He faced his head in his hands and cried. How could the jury side with the car manufacturer? They knew the mechanic was vindictive and had destroyed the evidence that would have proved he had not replaced Allie's airbag. Stefan's mind went next to Allie's face as the foreman gave the verdict. He could see the shock in her eyes, and her body collapsed in her chair as she covered her face with her hands. The mental picture tore at Stefan's heart, and he felt ashamed. He stood quickly and strode to his car. He drove home, but instead of going inside, marched straight to the beach. He lifted his gaze from the ocean before him and up to the heavens. What kind of attorney am I? I should have pursued subpoenaing the mechanic, no matter what he would testify to. He shook his head. Now Allie and Lauren will not have the financial protection they deserve. And it's all because of me. I've failed them. Looking out at the water, Stefan remembered Sophie saying the waves crashing in and out was the ocean's way of sweeping the clutter from the shore and making it clean once more. And what a beautiful picture of what God does for our hearts. Stefan continued to speak to the heavens. I don't know why my wife loved you so much, God. You've taken her away from me, broken my spirit, and now taken away my career. He paused, lowered his eyes, and shook his head. The Barkers would be better off without me. I did them no good. I failed Sophie when she needed me most. And you must think I'm pathetic. His chest felt tight, as if it were suffocating him. As a wave washed over his shoes, he spoke softly. I'm sorry, Sophie. He staggered forward, the salty water washing over his head. It's kind of easy to feel this, guy, isn't it? If you lost your spouse and all you have left is your job, and things don't turn out the way you want them to, and you've given up on God, what do you have then? There's a lot of people in this kind of position. And if God puts you in their path, don't turn away. Listen if they talk, and if they won't talk, give them a hug. I've known all too many people who've gotten this low. I'm going to welcome Susan on. I'm going to bring her on now. As I live and breathe. It worked. Hi.
Trying to turn my volume up a little bit more.
Live and breathe. There we go. All right, we got you on here. So, your background is in teaching, but I know that you did a lot of research for this book in Resurrection. You called it the R&L Center, and you did a lot of research in behavioral health care centers. I just kind of wanted to touch a little bit on, you know, the difference between the training that you received in suicide prevention in middle school, which, you know, we would like to think that's really young, but it isn't too young to be thinking, unfortunately, in that mindset. And, you know, the behavioral health care setting, you know, was there a presence of suicide in your teaching, in your career at that age, in middle school? And
Yes, we had several cases where kids have been in major crisis, and we've had to walk through with them step by step, trying to get them help.
Yeah.
One of the things they teach us as a teacher is always take the student at his word when he says or she says that they're in crisis.
Yeah. Now, did they ever write essays or anything like that where they confessed anything?
Yes, they keep journals, and we do journals every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I have told them all through the years that I've done this is that they can write anything they want, but if something that they write is something that can harm them or is illegal, then it's completely, I can turn it over to someone else, and they understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just amazed at how honest, and when I taught high school kids, how honest everybody was. I think people are just desperate for somebody to care.
Yeah, they are. And to listen and not offer advice.
That's it.
You know, I think having struggled with my mental health since I was 14 years old, I can tell you one of the most dangerous and devastating things that people do every day is offer unsolicited and unqualified counseling. And they do it every day, whether because they watch a show or they listen to a podcast or they read a book, and all of a sudden they're psychologists, they're therapists, and it's not true. And it's so dangerous. And I look at what Stefan is experiencing, and I put myself in his position, and it's like, there's no mention in chapter 1 of him having children. So I can only go from what I see here that he's lost everything that ever could have given him the strength to keep going. You know, if he's not in a strong relationship with the Lord, he's lost the love of his life, and now his career, he believes, is over. You can
he has two sons.
Oh, okay.
And they get divided because the sons are still loyal to their Christian faith when he's having a real crisis with it. Later on in the novel, he has to deal with a friend in the behavioral health care center where he goes who is in the same crisis. And he's kind of put together some of the things that were done for him that he was able to give back to someone else.
But it's interesting, though, that in this crisis, he never even thinks of them.
Nope.
And I think that's very telling. You know, when you're at the absolute bottom, the things that slip your notice because you're not in a healthy state of mind.
Yeah.
You know, if he were well, he would have thought of them, but he was unwell and he didn't.
Yeah.
I really like the way that you made it clear that all he wanted to do was isolate, because that is so accurate. That is so accurate. Get away from everybody, you know, and not have to confront his paralegal, or, and I mean, that was spot on. When you had to talk to these kids, I mean, did you go to them directly, or how did you handle it? Did you turn their journals into the school guidance counselor or the nurse, or what was the next action step?
Well, usually what I would do is show what they had written to my principal and say, what do you think about this? What do we need to do?
Yeah.
But my students have always really trusted me, and that's kind of a humbling and scary position to be in, because sometimes you only have 3 to 4 seconds to decide what to do.
Right.
And it's not always the right thing, but I take very seriously any kids who are telling me stuff.
Yeah.
I know them well enough to know when they're kind of enhancing things and when they're not.
Sure. Oh, as a teacher of your years of experience, yeah, you're gonna know. You're gonna know. You're gonna know by the look in their eye. But I think it says a lot about you as a human being and as a teacher that they would entrust that information to you, because they obviously know you care. And
I've had to be real careful with that, though, because of how much they believe. Like the other day when I was absent, the kids said, "Where were you yesterday?" And I said, "I went to Tahiti." And they looked at me and said, "And you got back already?" So I've got to be really careful about that, because they really do believe a lot.
Oh, that's funny. So when you were doing, I know you did a lot of your research online for behavioral healthcare centers, and you wanted to make sure that they had chaplains. What is the difference between a chaplain in a behavioral healthcare center and, say, a pastor in a church? What is the difference in that role?
Well, I think the pastor in the church is really more whole family kind of thing. They also do more of the funerals and marriages and things like that, though the chaplain in the story does perform a funeral. His focus is more on the residents that are there. That's almost like their church community, where they don't really have outreach, because that is an outreach to the families of those that are in the behavioral health care center.
Yeah. So, you know, the in-care facility, inpatient facility I went to, let's just say there was no minister there. There was no chaplain there. That was as far away as possible from the environment. So this sounds like, quite frankly, a lovely place to be. And you were so mindful of all the terms. You said this is set in Clapnos Bay, California. What does Clapnos mean?
It is a New Testament Greek word for weeping, because that really encumbers everything that's within the story. If I'm hurting so bad, how does God feel about that? Right. So everything is wrapped around that. The name of this facility is Bethany RNL. RNL is the resurrection in the life, where we actually do deal with seeing God's emotions as he feels them along with us.
Yeah. And you said John chapter 11 plays a big role in this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's when Jesus is talking to Mary, and he says, "I am the resurrection and the life." And
that's right.
That's set in Bethany,
with
the resurrection of Lazarus. You know, when you were talking, when we had our pre-production meeting, you said one of the things that you most wanted to demonstrate in this book was genuine Christian faith. Why is that so important to you?
It's really kind of funny, because people often ask me which character is really me. And I say that because there's a little part of my faith in Christianity in all three characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we try to put on a cloak of piousness when in reality, that's not how life is. God can take it. And
Mm-hmm.
Stephen comes right out and comes full force. I don't like this. I don't know why you're doing it.
Yeah.
The other two characters are so wounded in other ways, particularly one that's been wounded by the church.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we come authentically across to people, they're much more likely to listen to
Yeah.
our faith in our story.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, people can smell a phony and they have no use for that.
Yeah.
I know I don't. Um, I would prefer people be honest, kindly honest if possible. They don't have to be nasty about it, but I think it's important to be transparent. I think that's especially if you claim Christ, then you better be honest at the very least.
And that's been something interesting with my character of the chaplain, because in many feedback emails I get from readers, they'll say, I wish I had a pastor like Chaplain Miller. But I tried to make him somebody who was very real and would get right down to the brass tacks of telling me, okay, so what does the word faith mean? What does it mean to believe? Those kind of things.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And if you can't be honest and vulnerable, when you're dealing with a topic like this, you're never going to reach your reader.
Right.
I've said on this show before, one of my mentors, Joyce Ellis, said that readers are the most selfish people in the world because we're always looking for something. We want something really special at every page. And when you deal with something like this, and I love that you had multiple points of view. What made you want to approach this from so many different points of view as opposed to just writing it from Stefan's point of view?
And that was a big wrestling thing when I was originally contracted for the book, was to do that without confusing the reader.
Yeah.
But what I did when I sat down to start writing this, I tried to think of as many different kinds of wounds that a Christian might have in their lifetime. And then I picked the three that I have, the wound of faith, and then the wound of the marriage falling apart, and the wound of the church, spiritual abuse that can happen. And I went with those three.
Yeah, I think that it's brave and gutsy to go with different points of view. I think that's hard. Did you struggle with writing from a male point of view?
Actually, they were easier for me than females.
Really?
Yes.
Do elaborate.
I don't know. That's a hard thing to elaborate on. I think men in many ways tend to be much more straightforward than sometimes we women are. As we're just so close to holding everything into our hearts. Men, they just, come right out and plow their way through. The chaplain is really quite the opposite of that in many ways. But as I'm writing the prequel to this book, it's his backstory and why he became the way he did. But I think of the three characters, Stefan is the one I relate to the most because he's so genuine and he's so raw and he's not pretending at all. The other two aren't either, but I don't know. I can't tell you more than that. That's a really good question.
Well, we'll pretend it's a spoiler alert.
That sounds good.
Well, when you write a book, the first thing you want to do is think about your audience, and you want to know who your readership is going to be. You had a specific group of people in mind. You said that you wanted to reach Christians who've been hurt and who are desperately questioning if God cares about their pain. Why that particular group?
Because that's where I come from. I was raised in a Christian school and in the church, and I saw so much hurting there. And then I started teaching in the public schools, which I had never been in until I started teaching. And I saw the same hurts there. So I thought, okay, somebody needs to speak not only for the kids, which is what I did as a teacher, but somebody needs to speak for the hurting ones at church as well. Yeah. But to be honest, I more approached it as if I was raising my fist to God and saying, show me that you care. Show me that you care. Because I'd watch the news every night and I would see so many shootings, mass shootings, angry politicians. And I said, how do you feel when you look down on this earth and see that kind of stuff? Because if he cares about that, then he certainly can care about me.
And did he have a scriptural answer to that question?
Yes, I think that all came together years ago in my high school Bible classes when I was teaching John chapter 11. The whole Bottle House book came from that chapter, especially when Mary and Martha said the thing that many of us Christians have said, if you had only been here, this would not have happened. And how more raw can that be? And Jesus didn't rebuke them. He didn't tell them that that was a horrible thing to think. What did he do? He went and he cried with them. And when I noticed, see, I always kind of wondered why Jesus wept was even in the Bible. I mean, he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He knew what was going to happen. So why was he weeping? And the only thing I can really conclude is that he cares about what people care about, and deeply. So I wove that in with the message with my bottles for why the chaplain collects bottles, which I won't give too much information about because that is a spoiler alert. But I wanted to show the contrast of how much God cares in comparison to how much we care. And there is no comparison whatsoever. So that's where I built the idea that came through the chaplain's collection of bottles.
Yeah, you know, of all places, it was my medieval history class in college. My professor, who I don't know what he believed, if anything, but when you talk Middle Ages, you have to talk about the Catholic Church. You just plain have to. And he was talking about how part of the reason that he believed the church gained so much power during that time was because of the compassionate nature of Jesus, and how that appealed to women and to the people who were living in such desperate poverty at that time. And I remember walking away from that class thinking, yeah, compassion. That is probably the best word to describe Jesus's behavior and his attitude. Compassion. You know, we know about love, but compassion has a different face, a different element, and he shows his compassion to Mary and Martha. It's so profoundly in that Martha in that conversation. But it's like, you know, sometimes I think people think of God as being heartless, but when you come to Jesus, you can't deny the heart in him. And that's why a verse like Jesus wept has to be there. I think his heart broke just the same. But I mean, there are stories in the Bible where it's clear God's heart is broken too. You just have to look harder, I think. Jesus is his feelings are easier for us to access, I think. And but I love that you wanted to write, you know, that was kind of the core of this whole book. Jesus wept. It's a beautiful thing. I've never heard of a book that was based so strongly on that story. I mean, if you're going to remember one story from the Bible other than Jesus rising from the dead, it might well be Lazarus, you know.
Well, and I like how it came together at the end, coupling it with Revelation, and he will wipe away every tear from your eye. And there was so many times as I was writing this manuscript that I would just be crying and crying and crying while I'm working, because as you mentioned in your talking before I came on, to write this well, I had to go into that person. And that was very painful for all three of the characters, to actually get inside their make-believe skin and feel things so that I could write as if I'm expressing what they were feeling at the time.
Exactly. You have to be willing to feel things. I mean, really feel things if you're going to be an artist, if you're going to be a creator in any field. I think You have to, if you aren't willing to, and if you can't allow that, it's not going to work, especially when you deal with certain topics.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe that's just something that somebody needs to hear tonight. I don't know, but it's important, I think, to acknowledge that. And it's uncomfortable, isn't it?
It is. It is. Yeah.
They don't announce that at writers' conferences, but they should.
A lot of tears.
Yeah, exactly. And writing is a lonely profession unless you go to conferences or you're part of groups, writers groups, and critique groups, whatever. And these people are real, aren't they? These
Yes,
characters
they
are real.
are.
They're part of
They
your
are very
family.
much so.
Yeah, they're with you at lunch, and they're with
Mm-hmm.
you first thing in the morning, and
Yep.
they become as real to you as anybody in your life, and you start to know how they would answer a question if you were to ask it of them.
Yes.
And that's not insanity, that's creativity. And so if you're not willing to weep with your characters, it's and laugh and celebrate
Mm-hmm.
as well. But
Mm-hmm.
it's something I think people need to know. Maybe we'll weave
Yep.
that into the author tips that you'll give at the end. We're giving
Yes,
you a
definitely.
bonus tip.
Definitely.
Now, you haven't only written fiction, you've written some nonfiction as well.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about 100 Minutes with God.
What I started doing about 3 years ago is writing a daily blog where I gave minute devotions.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say minute, there's a scripture verse and then there's a practical application. One of the gifts that I believe God has given me is to make a very practical way of writing for Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
practical ideas. What I really liked is I had from a marketing class I took by Seth Godin. He started sending emails out every day, and I signed up for them. And they were really short. And I remember feeling relieved that they were short because I'm so busy. But
Yeah.
I thought every day I looked forward to reading it because number one, it was short, but number two, it was very practical. So I thought if he is successful doing it, then I could be successful doing it. So I started doing that. Somewhere else I read, I think it was on Twitter somewhere, that if you do something like this, numbering them shows your audience that there are this many ahead that you can go back to. So I started doing that, and now I'm up to 12,000 something minutes that I've done. So I've put them into two books, 100 Minutes with God and 100 More Minutes with God. The first one has been revised, and it was a #1 new release on Amazon. They're both practical. They're great for gifts, and you can take them. They're good for discussion, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love writing them too. So it really is just a joyful time for me. They're on my website. I mail them to my subscribers, and of course the books are available on Amazon. So, and then I got a wonderful designer from Portugal, and she designed my covers, and they are just stunning. And for me to tell her I wanted something to represent time and eternity, and for her to come up with what she came up with on the book covers. I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a big clock right here.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful. Both of the covers are just beautiful. I've had a lot of people ask for more, so I don't know what's ahead. But that's what I've been working on as far as nonfiction goes.
Yeah. Well, devotionals are a wonderful, wonderful market because they do have time to sit with a devotional while they're eating their breakfast real quick or right before they go to sleep or whatever, They do have time for that. And you email those out, correct, to people?
Yes, you can get access to my website has them under my blog, but there's also a sign up sheet to get on the email list to get these every morning. It's about the middle of the page when you scroll down on susangrant.com.
Yes.
So, but yes, they're out. And I've heard usually at least once a week, I hear from someone of something that it did for them spiritually. So that's really a good encouragement.
Absolutely. And if you can write short form nonfiction and long form with fiction, that says a lot about your skill as a writer, because that's pretty far apart. The 200 or 300 word devotional as opposed to the 95,000 word novel.
It's quite different. I don't know. It's just funny. Like in my classroom, we play stump the student, test the teacher. And so they throw out a subject and I have to write 50 words about that subject. And you'd be surprised what I've written 50 words about. And then I do that with them and they just think it's hilarious. Of course, they don't realize I've tricked them into writing, but it's expanded my skills to not just be in one area
Sure.
of writing.
Yes.
I love writing for fun too. And that's what I do with the kids a lot.
Can always tell a real teacher because they never call them students, always my kids.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
always my kids. My mom taught for 33 years and it was always my kids. Thousands of kids.
The kids today wrote, carry on a conversation between a sock and a shoe. So they had quite an interesting show with that. And of course they made me write it too. So it's just really interesting how you can really expand your abilities just in the silliest ways, such as I'm doing with my students. Yeah.
That's really clever. It's really clever. Now, when you talk though about writing, there were some things that you wish you could have done a little bit differently. You had talked about sticky notes. Or...
Yeah. I'm doing this now as I've started the prequel to the Bottle House. I wish from the start that I had kept a list. Every time I have somebody associated with Stefan, I put who they are, what their name is, like who his spouse's name was, who his kids' names are, what was the name of the town they grew up in, where do they live now? Because later on, when I'd have to reference that, I wouldn't remember. So I spent a lot of time on Word using the find gadget. And if I had done that, it would have been better. I use sticky notes a lot because each character was a different sticky note color. And so when I was trying to make sure I didn't have too much of one character, you know, over a certain amount of chapters, I would move the sticky notes around until my dog got a hold of the sticky notes, which kind of took care of that. But anyway.
Well, while we're talking about your dog, it's a red long-haired dachshund. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. He's full of it.
I've seen a little bit of his handiwork on Facebook. My goodness, he knows how to work a cardboard box. That's for sure, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's got ADHD.
Well, so what would you advise somebody who doesn't want to just use sticky notes? Would you advise? What's the backup plan?
I would just have a notebook handy. That's what I'm doing now. But hey, the sticky notes made it in. I've even got pictures of it to prove I did have it all in place. I didn't really know what I was doing before, but I would just keep a notebook and I would have the names of your main protagonist and antagonist and just keep up with things such as, like in this case, each character had their own doctor at the behavioral health care center. They had their own nurses. So I had to keep up with which doctor was with which person.
Sure.
You know, all those things. And if I had done that from the start, it would have made it a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've heard at different conferences, they talked about creating a character dossier. You know, some people have character glossaries, you know, things of that ilk that just simplify things. And, you know, as a narrator, I love it when my author can give me a ton of information and just email me a file and then I can sit with that and review it. And, because if it's a saga and we've got multiple families with multiple family members, it becomes a family tree and it's like, wait a minute, what, who, you know, it makes life easier if you have that. So, and you know,
and each of my chapters focuses on one character, usually with the chaplain.
Sure.
So that helps with that for the reader as well.
Yeah.
And the chaplain doesn't have a point of view anywhere until the very last chapter, which was the suggestion of my editor, which was a fabulous suggestion. So of course I had to rewrite the whole last chapter, which was fine. But I hadn't thought of that. But it really helps people who are reading to not get lost on who you're talking about, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And who is your editor?
Sue Fairchild.
Okay, so we'll give Sue a shout out.
Yes,
And
she did
who
a
is your
fabulous
cover
job.
designer? Let's talk cover designer. Who was your cover designer?
Oh, I wish you hadn't asked me. I don't remember off the top of my
Was
head.
it Dorinda? Dorinda Babcock?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Wonderful cover designer. Well, our editors are important people in our lives. They really can bring a new dimension and make a good book better or wonderful.
Yeah, and that's been fabulous because I've taken my edited versions and shown the kids how much stuff is marked.
Yeah.
And it makes them feel so much better when
Mhm.
theirs is all marked up. I said,
Absolutely.
it's just part of making yourself a better writer.
Absolutely. And I think people get too sensitive about their manuscripts. This person isn't trying to destroy them. They're trying to help it be a better book. And accepting criticism graciously is very important, I think, as a writer.
Definitely.
What else would you recommend to somebody who's an aspiring author?
I had a good friend of mine who is big in the classical voice world. He suggested to me, for multiple reasons, to not show my manuscript, any part of it, to anyone until it got finished, until I had written at least the first draft of everything. And I asked him why, and he said, because what happens is you start getting critiques and things added into as you're going, and the work no longer is yours. It's more of a work of everybody around you. Of course, editors and people like that have to be involved in that. But I think his advice is a really good one. And that's what I did. I just kept writing and then waited till I got to the end. I highly recommend that to people because I think it saved me some aggravation and the feeling at the end of the book when I put my pen down, so to speak. I knew I had done it. It was not based upon what I thought somebody else thought it should be or what they said it should be. And then I chickened out and did what they said. It came right from the Lord and me.
Yeah. And when you write Christian material, you do have to listen. If God wants you to take that book in a different direction, did you have a very different vision for this book from what it turned into? Or is it in keeping with how you started?
No, it is. I actually wrote 3 books, one for each character, and then I wove them in and out of each other, which probably was a lot more difficult than I do it now. No, I don't think so. I think that the ending is much, much stronger than it would have been without my editors and publishers' guidance. But yes, and I'm really thankful for Elk Lake Publishing because they gave me a lot of freedom to do what I wanted to do with the theme of the book. So no, I think it definitely is where I wanted to go, and I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, Elk Lake's a special place. It's a very, very special place. And they don't publish any. I don't know for sure, but every writer that I have interviewed, it seems like there's always, in every single book, there's an element of something in there that just needs to be said. It needs to be understood.
I will never forget the morning after, no, send the manuscript off. No, send the manuscript off. Don't hear anything. The morning when I got an email and said, we want your book. And there's just no feeling like that. I mean, it was just like, I can't believe it. So it's really exciting thing. And I guess I would also say to people, don't give up because you're going to get thousands and thousands and thousands of rejections, but it only takes one yes.
That's right. There are people who will save. I mean, granted, most of them now are electronic, but that would save, their rejection slips as a reminder that you just keep going. You don't look at it as failure. You look one step closer to your goal. Did you have any other tips that you might offer to aspiring authors?
I think that if you get stuck, my challenge to you is to get on your computer, pull up where you left off, read what you had prior to it, and just go.
Absolutely.
You can always delete, you can always, but I found that things will flow eventually.
Yeah.
And I've been very humbled by what I'll have the chaplain saying and doing. And I'm thinking, where did that come from? Well, I know where it came from. above my writing station that my husband built me is the quote, "I'm like a pencil in God's hands. God does the writing. The pencil has little to do with it." And I've been so humbled by what I've seen being typed onto the computer screen, because I know that it's not coming just from me.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. But your spirit and your mind have to be open to listen.
Mm-hmm.
If you go
Yes.
into it with the idea that, it has to go exactly the way you had imagined the scene, you're not allowing. You have to allow God to flow through you. And that's important. When you're going to write Christian work, you have to be willing to allow.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to scroll up now through the comments and see if anybody asked you any specific questions. And we're going to do just a little acknowledgement for who's here, because I see a lot of names that I don't know. And I'm thinking you probably do. We got Crystal McIntyre Cleary. Is that
Yes.
yours? Yeah.
A
Zach.
shout out to all my former students who were there. Hello, I haven't forgotten you.
Got Zach Foster.
Uh-huh.
And let's see, Heather and Garrett Farrell.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of Elk Lake people. We've got Peggy Sue Wells, and we've got Tracy Bradford, and my friends Alan and Joyce Jacobs are here. Judy Leach is here, and I got Jen. Thank you for being here, Jen Pengelly. Those of you who didn't watch her live the other night, you need to watch her live. Let's see. Oh, look at that. Crystal says you're the best teacher.
Well, Crystal, you're one of the best students. How's that?
Sharon Penninger?
Uh-huh.
Oh, let's see here. Crystal, Miss Grant sent me the book, so she knew I was having a lot of problems at that time. And I received it and I read that book nonstop. I took a point to give it just a rest just for a little bit because it got too real, but it connected me hands down, and I love the meaning of it. How about that? That's when you know your book matters, when it touches a life. Regina Stinson, my personal guardian angel. How about that?
She better be careful. I may be a demon in disguise.
Uh-oh. And Jen Lee Pengelly, I love that your audience is such a real group of people. So many people go to church because they're hurt and broken and looking for answers.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
And Regina Stinson says that your devotional are amazing. If you don't receive them, definitely join her list. Uh-oh, she's telling tales out of school too. She says she's still your kid and she's 42. You don't need to tell your age.
Yes, she does.
29 and holding.
she's not shy at all.
We got Kelly Kokobeck watching. Uh-oh, Tracy. I'll bet you Tracy's right. She says they do have Tracy Bradford, fellow author at Elk Lake. They do have virtual sticky notes.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I bet my dog Casey can't get to those.
Nope. Probably not. Crystal, she's saying, I love you, Mrs. G.
Love you too.
She's saying the book was a blessing. And let's see what else. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy says you're a blessing. You're a blessing. So we appreciate all of you who watch and comment. It adds such an element of a camaraderie when I see the comments, the live comments, and know that you're here. It's great to see the hearts and the thumbs up too. It's just wonderful. We live in an amazing time. I mean, you're in Maine, I'm in Pennsylvania, and we're talking, and it's like we're in the room together. And I'm remembering that correctly, right? You're in Maine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I had a quick second there of doubt.
We might be getting snow on Wednesday, so pray for snow day.
Oh, yes, that's right. We have a little tiny dusting here, not too much, because it was 70 degrees here last week. So it's not, but yeah, it's coming. We're definitely facing Thanksgiving very, very soon. So anyway, Susan, thank you for having the courage to write this book, because this is not easy material that you're covering, but it's important because it's the kind of stuff that people need. And there are a whole lot of people who won't go to church, but who will read a book. And there's a whole lot of people who won't go to a therapist, but will read a book. And your chaplain may well be the therapist that they're looking for. So I thank you for having the courage to write this book. And I'm grateful that you came on tonight so that we could reach another audience. So thank you.
Well, I'll tell Crystal and Regina and Zach and all of you guys how much I miss you. And thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it.
That's right. That's absolutely true. Well, thank you again for being here. And thanks everybody for watching. I'm going to say goodnight, Susan, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.